Well, hello and welcome to Insight with Political Tours. The election is little more than 3 weeks away, and the polls suggest that Harris has a narrow lead, but we are not so sure. We're just back from our recce in Michigan, and we've been putting the final touches to our tour in Pennsylvania, two states which are seen as must-wins for both candidates. With us here to discuss the developments in those states and nationally, we've got two great speakers, the veteran correspondent Malcolm Brown, who's in Virginia, and also the Emeritus Professor of Politics at Wilkes University, Pennsylvania, Thomas J. Baldino. In a moment, we're going to be going through the polls with Tom, but before we do that, we're going to turn to Malcolm Brown for an update on what's been happening on the campaign trail. Malcolm, a lot has changed since we last spoke.
A lot has changed. It's sometimes hard to remember. Things come in so thick and fast. But since we last spoke, another assassination attempt, so bringing it to two, against former President Donald Trump, when a sharp-eyed Secret Service agent spotted a rifle peeking out, I think, the sixth hole at one of Trump's Florida golf courses, and opened fire on that individual who ran away unscathed but was later apprehended. We've now got security threats against Donald Trump, potentially from Iran. The Biden administration hasn't flat out rejected that concern, and Donald Trump is asking for more security. So that's one whole storyline that's going on. We've had two massive hurricanes, notably one that very badly affected North Carolina, which is going to be a very important state. And it's one of the swing states we spend so much time talking about. The damage in Western North Carolina, the mountainous Western North Carolina, extremely serious. And there are still isolated communities that have had very little aid, it seems, although that's a topic of live debate and it's become a political campaign issue. We've also seen Liz Cheney coming out among other former old school Republicans, but really notable to see Liz Cheney, whose father, Dick Cheney, was really the Dark Lord as far as Democrats were concerned when he was vice president under George Bush. Dick Cheney also coming out in support of Kamala Harris. They're so dismayed by Donald Trump and the threat that they say he represents. Meanwhile, as you point out, we've got 24 days, I think it is, until the actual election day. But I should point out that here in my home state of Virginia, just down the road, voting is taking place right now. You can walk up to a building next to the courthouse, show your identification and cast your vote. That's already underway, and plenty of people are doing that. So to some extent, the die is cast. But as you've pointed out, this really is, it's a cliffhanger. If you're talking, every poll really is within margins of error and really on the low end of margins of error. And that's where we are.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating. We're all on tenterhooks. Tom, I think we're going to do the obvious. There are tons of polls coming out all the time. It's a complex matter. I think the best thing is to sort of dive in, and we will go to the New York Times' website. And if I just bring that up now, if I'm technically competent enough to do so, we should just be able to do that. Here. So here we go. I hope everyone can see that. Tom, I hope you can see that. So what we've got, just I think the key thing here is to look at the trend, isn't it, Tom?
Absolutely. Everyone should keep in mind that any single poll is just a snapshot in time. The most important thing about polls is any poll would be the trend over time. And since Harris came into the race, she's maintained about a 2 to 3 point lead over Trump. That's the national poll. But understand, we do things a little differently in the United States. We don't elect our president by direct popular vote. We have this thing called the Electoral College, and winning the popular vote by 7, 8, 10, 20 million doesn't do you any good if you don't win the 270 electoral votes that actually puts you in the White House. So, well, it's great for Harris to have that emotional lift from being ahead in the popular vote. What really matters is what is she doing in the key states that will get her over the magic number of 270. So if we start with Pennsylvania, it's one of the so-called blue wall states that there you go. You can see how close this is. It's definitely within, by the way, the national poll is within the margin of error as well. But if you look at that, the difference is in any given poll in the state, it's 1 to 2 points, well within the margin of error. And, the numbers for the Republicans in terms of registration have been narrowing the gap. When Obama won the state in 2008, the first time, Democrats had a rather large million or more registered voters than the Republicans. That gap has now shrunk to under 200,000, which for a state our size is significant. Republicans feel they have the momentum.
Is that due to good Republican organizing, or was that just a failure? Who do we pin? A Republican success, a Democratic failure, Tom?
Part of it is some on the Republicans for mobilizing. Democrats are also mobilizing. My read is it's voters who have been sitting out and not registering at all who are actually entering the electorate. But keep in mind that being a registered voter doesn't mean that you will actually turn out and vote. Going back to 2016, when Trump won Pennsylvania, he won my county, Luzerne County, which at that point was still a bellwether county, by 20 or 30,000 votes, despite the fact that Democrats had a 50 or 60,000 vote registration edge in the county. I mean, there was a significant Democratic advantage in the county, yet Trump won Luzerne County, strongly suggesting that it doesn't matter how you're registered, you're going to vote how you vote. So
it sort of indicates to me also, and then another sort of key factor is who doesn't vote. If you're not motivated to vote, and that's true. A key question of many groups.
Yes. It also explains why in Trump's and Harris's campaign strategy, they're spending many, many days in the state, right? Trump was back here Wednesday. He visited Scranton, invading Biden's old hometown, and then he went to Reading. And Reading is an old working class small city that has a very large Hispanic Latino population. In fact, it's now a majority Latino city. It's not a very large city, but it's majority. And there's a real push by Trump to convert those Latino voters into Republicans. Traditionally, they would vote, but one would normally predict that they would vote Democratic, but
we'll come back to that, because there's a bigger question about the Hispanic vote and how generally, and we're also going to talk about the black vote as well. Can we just skip away from Pennsylvania for a moment, and then we'll click on Michigan? So we just had, basically in Pennsylvania, neck and neck, and it's too close to call. Let's go to Michigan, so the other area we're going to tour, and both these states had this balancing act of having industrial centers where you've got a big Democratic base and then rural areas that are more conservative. I can't remember the expression about Pennsylvania, is that it's somewhere about Alabama being in between those Pittsburgh
it's Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between, without the blacks, right? Without large numbers of African Americans. That was James Carville, the Raging Cajun, back when he was running Bill Clinton's campaign.
Yeah. So this is really narrow. If you look at those two states as crucial for Harris to win, we've seen that it's too close to call, and here again. Yeah,
and one of the things that is very concerning for Harris in particular in Michigan is what will the Arab American vote do? How will it go? There's a very large Arab American population in and around Detroit and in a few other places in the state. and they went for Biden in big numbers in 2020. Given what's happening in the Middle East with Gaza and the Biden administration's pretty much unwavering support for Israel. I say unwavering in the sense that we continue to ship all kinds of military aid, but Netanyahu is unwilling to really concede anything in terms of negotiating a settlement to the war. And that frustrates Biden. And it's certainly frustrating Harris now.
And I think the Arab American vote in Michigan is numbered at 200,000. Malcolm, you go ahead.
Yeah, time to learn the name Jill Stein, who you might otherwise not pay much attention to, but she is the Green Party candidate, and she has been, with a sort of pacifist, anti-war platform as it relates to the Middle East, has been drawing attention, particularly in Michigan, away from the Dems and is representing, the potential spoiler role that the Democrats really fear in a place like that.
Yeah. We on the tour, we're going to be spending time in Dearborn. We've seen quite a few different groups there, and it's very clear that many Arab Americans are not going to be voting at all. I think it's not a question of voting for Trump out of spite, but just not turning up at the polls. So how much did Biden win in 2016 in Michigan, and how much did Trump win? I'm just trying to think, because those advantages were very narrow. The state was won in both cases by tens of thousands of votes, not hundreds of thousands of votes.
Well, in 2020, Michigan, I think, was under, 30,000, 20,000, something like that. It was very narrow, as was Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania was 80,000 in 2020. Just for the record, Clinton lost Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania in 2016, which was her downfall. She lost the.
I just looked it up. I just looked it up just since we've asked the question. The answer is Biden got 50.62% of the vote in Michigan to Trump's 47, nearly 48% last time around.
Yeah, so very narrow. Just while we're all here, we've got a new face has popped up on the screen. And for those of you going to Pennsylvania, Alex Norris, who's been the researcher working on both Michigan and Pennsylvania, is going to be joining Malcolm and Tom Baldino on their team to give you extra information and sort any problems out if you need them sorting out. But Alex is also has lived in Pennsylvania for some time and is a great journalist, and we're lucky to have him on board. So Alex is there in the background. I'm going to follow, before we come back to Wisconsin, Tom, which I do want to talk about in a second, I just do want to ask Malcolm where Obama has been today and why.
Well, he is basically the closer, which is a baseball term for the pitcher you bring in towards right at the end of the game, and who's meant to destroy the residual batting opposition, basically. But he's been out in Pennsylvania, and he is uniquely positioned to talk to a constituency of people that the Dems are really worrying about. I mean, he talks to a lot of Dems and potentially persuadable voters, but they're very concerned about black men in particular. Not that sort of huge swathes of them are going over to Donald Trump, but in a very tight election, if you can peel away a few percent in statistically important places like Pennsylvania, that's meaningful, and that's clearly a risk for Democrats based on the polling that we are seeing. So Barack Obama has been sort of scolding, taking a pretty stern line, actually, with African-American men, saying it's not saying essentially, look, I understand that there seem to be people drawn to Donald Trump through what they perceive as strength. He said Donald Trump doesn't display strength, and then he sort of talks about the attributes of strength and really chides them. It's a bit sort of school teacher-ish. I don't know how it plays, but it's fair to say that he really almost alone is able to generate this amount of attention to his comments and really be justified in making them, given his background. So if they want to go after that demographic, which they clearly do because they're wavering, the danger also being that some of them stay at home, Barack Obama's the guy. And so they've wheeled him out, and I think we can expect to see more of him between now and Election Day.
Yeah, okay. I was hoping to play a bit of what he was saying earlier today, but I'm not too sure that Zoom's signal is stable enough to do it. So we'll hold that back. May come back to that later. Tom, it's not the only group they're worrying about. I mean, we mentioned briefly the Hispanic vote, and it's unfair in a way to look at the Hispanic vote saying it's going to be. It's always voted Democrat. It's always voted in this particular way because it's a very diverse group coming from many different communities. But I guess the point is, with the sort of Catholic side to it, potentially conservative, but in terms of migration, if you've got relatives who need their visas or need citizenship, you would think that a Democratic Party is more favourable. What's going on with that? And maybe talk also about the polling as well on why black men don't see Harris as a convincing candidate.
Okay, so starting with the Latino vote, it would appear that, well, and as you rightly point out, it's not monolithic, right? There are Cubans, Dominicans, Haitians, Mexicans, and each group views itself somewhat differently than maybe the entire group would want to be portrayed. Cubans have historically been much more conservative in voting for Republicans. Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, and Haitians had tended towards Democrats. And Mexicans over time have become actually somewhat more liberal, but they've been more consistently Democratic in the past. The challenge is, because of the border issue, those who are here legally and have been here for a generation or so, they view themselves as American in a way that they want the border secure. And while, yes, they may have relatives who may want to come in, they don't want illegals coming in and causing problems that would then reflect badly on their community. So it's important for Harris and the Democrats to stand strong on the border security, while yet maintaining some empathy for those who wish to come into the United States, fleeing tyranny or some kind of threats to their lives in their home country. And this is a criticism of the Biden administration, had it acted sooner to clamp down harder on the number of people who were given asylum, making them wait longer or whatever, it would have been harsh in one sense, but it would have demonstrated a desire to actually do more to restrict immigrants coming in. Illegals will always come through, though. This is the idea that you build a wall and all the immigrants suddenly who want to come in are going to be stopped by this wall. That's crazy. Since it first went up, people have gone under it, over it, and around it. Right? There's no stopping people who want to come in. So on the immigration issue, those who are here will be sympathetic to the needs of some of those who want to come in. But Trump's position on immigration does resonate with a good chunk of Latino voters. It's the other issues, though, as well, that I think are going to be involved. And again, the Latino community is not monolithic and homogenous. There are those who are much more socially conservative and who are more pro-life than the Democratic Party as a whole. And the role of the Catholic Church in that is important. But for Harris to make the argument that she is pro-choice with that group, because there's I'm against abortion, in any case, even if it's to protect the life of the mother, but making the argument that being pro-choice means that it's your choice, you get to do what you want, but there's also going to be opportunities if you need an abortion to protect the life of the mother, rape and incest, you have that. The other side wants to ban abortion for all reasons. And that seems to have some resonance within the Latino community, trying to differentiate among the groups. And the Latino population is growing, especially in the battleground states. In Pennsylvania, for example, we talked about Reading, but in my county, Luzerne County, population is up in some of the major cities. So it's there.
But if this election hinges on immigration, it's going to be bad for Harris, because it's clear that Trump is more trusted on the topic, and you can ask him the price of a loaf of bread at the moment, and it will somehow circle back to the perils of illegal immigration. So he has made famous, unfortunately for them, I think the small town of Springfield, Ohio, where he has flagged up without any evidence that has been shown, credible evidence, that Haitians are eating dogs and cats, which he memorably said during the first and so far only presidential debate. He's also flagged up the evils, the iniquities of gangs, the Venezuelan street gangs in parts of Aurora, Colorado. He was actually just doing that today. They clearly think this is a winner for them. And if this election focuses on that, and he's most trusted on the topic, that's obviously good for him.
Yeah, yes. No. Tom, this brings me back, and I think I'm going to highlight a recent Wall Street Journal poll. I think it's just today, in fact, is leading on some key issues. He's leading on the economy, the rising cost of living, which is meant to be one of the themes that Kamala Harris is campaigning most of all, and also on immigration. So based on those three big themes, which seem to have dominated the campaign so far, it would seem that he's the likely candidate to win. How does she push back at this? How does she gain some kind of tempo?
She talks about empathy for the immigrants, right? That's one thing. The economy, in terms of absolute numbers, is pretty strong. And despite the numbers that were released the other day, with showing a slight uptick in inflation and a slight uptick in unemployment, people filing for unemployment benefits, the economy objectively is doing well, considering where it was 3 or 4 years ago. The thing is that people expect the pocketbook issues, the price of eggs, milk, and whatever, they expect to see those prices be what they were 3 years ago. That's not going to happen. Those prices will never, ever come down to the levels they were 3 or 4 years ago. That's just the reality of the economy. Prices of gas and a couple of other items do fluctuate, but we will never see $2 a gallon gasoline again. I doubt that. We'd have to be in a pandemic where people aren't driving anywhere and they're trying to give gasoline away, right? So, yeah, as you note, the three main issues appear to go against her, but there's still Trump. Harris wants to make this election an issue about the main issue, Trump. He is unfit for office. He is a threat to democracy. If she can keep that focus and make sure people understand that, however she continues to try to do this, that no matter what you feel about my position on issues, how you feel about the economy, ultimately, Donald Trump will make your life worse in the future if he's in the Oval Office, and that's one of the reasons why people like the Cheneys and other Republicans are willing to support Harris. They disagree with her on many, if not all, policy issues, but they just don't want to see Trump in the White House. I think
the glimmer of hope maybe is not so much on the policy front for her, because clearly if people are driven by inflation, immigration, and so on, then that's not good for her, because the perception is he's better for them on that. You could make the case that the Democrats have failed to explain why people had more money in their pocket during the Trump administration, which was largely because you couldn't go out and it. There was a huge pandemic, gas. As Tom just pointed out, was it cheap because people couldn't really drive anywhere, but people seem to remember the money in their pocket, things being better. And the Democrats don't seem to have persuaded people about the reason for that. The other thing that I think might give them a glimmer of hope is that she just represents a sort of a change of tone that may be appealing to the electorate. And for me, the window on that was the vice presidential debate that just took place. J.D. Vance was pretty smooth. Slick was the word that's constantly used. He's quite a good debater. He's clearly an intelligent man. He made his case quite well. And even when he told clearly outright fabrications and things that were demonstrably not true, he sounded quite persuasive and looked quite good whilst he did it. His opponent, Tim Walz, the Democrat, looked pretty shaky. He certainly at the start looked pretty shaky, and all the way through looked a bit like the kid who's trying to remember his homework without referring to the notes. But actually, when you looked at the numbers afterwards, so I thought, oh, wow, clear win for Vance. When you looked at the numbers afterwards, it was much more balanced, actually. And Tim Walz did pretty well. It was sort of even-ish, which was not at all my impression from watching it. So I think some of us who are steeped in the politics, we may be too keen to pick it apart and look for sort of obvious faux pas from a traditional perspective. But actually, that suggested to me that the electorate wants the much more civil kind of discourse that took place then. And if that's the case, that could be good for Harris, because she has been, while she's made pointed criticisms of Donald Trump, it hasn't been a real mudslinging, certainly from her direction to him so much. I mean, they have raised real concerns about him as a danger to democracy and so on, but it hasn't been that sort of very personalized attack. So that might be good for Democrats if the electorate really is ready to move beyond the current animus and the temperature of the political discourse.
Okay, well, I'd love to get some questions now, everyone. So please do either raise your hand by hitting the hand mark, the hand at the bottom of the screen, or writing your question in the Q&A, and then you can put your questions to our panelists. We often talk about the October surprise. I think that the October surprise has perhaps been both the war in the Middle East, and so my questions to both of you are, has that had much impact? We've obviously spoken about Michigan, but then the other big thing has been the weather and the hurricanes, and I'm particularly interested in, Tom, that's going through Florida. Does that change things in Florida? I mean, is voter turnout going to be an issue? Does it change things in Georgia, the Carolinas? I'm interested if that comes into play in any way, Tom.
Florida has already begun to vote, right? So it has early voting. It has no excuse mail ballots. This will slow the turnout in those parts of the storm was huge. Much of the state was affected by it in one way, shape, or form. So between now and 24 days from now, it probably will hinder some voters, okay, but not as dramatically as I think Western North Carolina, where towns were leveled, and there may be some diminution of turnout in the western part of the state, which is more Republican. Asheville is a little bit of a blue dot, but the rest of the area is very red. So that might suppress a bit of the vote there. Remains to be seen. With regard to the war in the Middle East, I think a surprise might be how Israel responds to the Iranian attack. If it goes after oil tanks or the nuclear weapons development program there, that would be dramatic. And then it might do more harm to the Harris campaign.
Yeah, I guess the issue there would be oil prices, Malcolm, and that's sort of, if the stock markets had a panic and there were the bad messages about the economy. Are those your thoughts? Any other thoughts?
Yeah, well, plus it makes the Biden administration and by extension Kamala Harris look weak, because the Biden administration has been trying to simultaneously support but restrain Israel, and has clearly succeeded in the former but failed in the latter. And if a large-scale attack against Iran takes place shortly before the election, it will look very weak, and that will transfer to Kamala Harris, potentially unfairly. She's only the vice president, but the vice president does have a role in foreign policy decision-making, albeit in a sort of consultative advisory capacity. But you can be sure that the Trump campaign will be sure to pin any negative spillover from that kind of conflict on her as much as they can.
I will add
Okay,
this.
well, in terms of questions, sorry, Tom, go on.
I was just going to say, should Israel do something drastic, like attack the nuclear development program, or worse, in one sense, the oil refineries? It would be an opportunity for Harris to break with the Biden administration and say, I support Israel, but I condemn Netanyahu. I don't think we should supply strategic offensive weapons to Israel, and make the strongest pitch she can to swing the Arab American vote. She has nothing to lose at that point, really, right? She'd turn off some of the most liberal members of the Democratic Party, but at this point, they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah,
they
okay.
Sit home, vote for Jill Stein, but if the Democrats want to win, she has to do something drastic at that point.
Yeah,
so.
Okay. Look, I'm going to take a question in just a second from Mateusz Leiter, who I never know where he is in the world. Last time it was Patagonia, before it was Dubai. But before we do that, Alex Norris, who's with us in Pennsylvania. At the moment, I think you're in New York, actually, and has been doing hard work on the tour. If he just opens his microphone, I just want to get a few thoughts. Any reactions to what you've been hearing so far? And I might quiz you about some of the highlights we're going to get on the tour. But just a couple of reactions, if you can, to what you've been hearing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the interesting points I heard was how Americans vote with their wallets, right? It's essentially how they're looking at their bank account, and they're seeing how right now they may be doing worse than back when Trump was still president. I think of Philadelphia, where I lived for 4 years. I think of the fact that when I moved there, if you go to get halal, for example, in the street, it might cost $5. You go there now, it might cost $8 or $9 or even $10. These small things won't decide the election by itself, but I think Americans are looking at. Oops.
Sorry, Stuart Williams, you need to cut your microphone. Sorry, you've got they're jumping in there. Go ahead. Go on, Alex. Sorry.
Yeah, but I think that's definitely something that can't be understated, is how important it is that people look at their grocery bills, or they look at, gasoline, for example, and say, why is it so much more expensive now than it was when Trump was president? And you say things like, the stock market is doing well, for example, but I'm not sure that those benefits, the average person, the average American, necessarily see those benefits. So it's also a distributional question of who's gaining, who's doing well, and who's not doing so well. Another interesting thing that was brought up was the October surprise and how that could be Iran. I think it's a very interesting point. We haven't necessarily seen a huge shakeup in the past few months. Well, I mean, other than the fact that, of course, Harris is now the candidate. But since then, it's been a lot of momentum for the Harris campaign. The question is if they can keep that into the election. And I am curious to see that if escalation in the Middle East could be that one of those events, one of those, not a scandal per se, but one of those disruptive events that could sort of derail her campaign and make her, answer hard questions. Trump will certainly, capitalize on that. And it's interesting to see if, the United States, if the Biden administration will be able to stop that from happening.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Alex. Well, let's jump in there. I think we'll take Mateusz first. Where are you, Mateusz? Can you hear us? Yeah, go ahead.
I can hear you, Nicholas. Hello. I am in the jungles of Suriname right now.
Like another win. Hello, Suriname. Go on.
I'm more unpredictable than the results of this election. But in any case, my question was regarding, there's so much effort and attention on the swing states, and I was just wondering, because there are other states that there's no much polling, such as Alaska and others. And I was just reading that maybe Harris could come as a surprise in some of these places. Do you think there are any other states other than the classic swing states that could bring a surprise to this election?
Great question. I was wondering that just the same as I was looking at that map. Tom, what are your thoughts?
Well, there's a reason why the candidates have chosen those 6 or 7 states. The others are very much locked into either being Democratic or Republican. There's no way that Trump will win California or New York or Massachusetts. No way that Harris wins Texas. I mean, we're looking at the states with large numbers of electoral votes. Alaska and Hawaii, one is solidly red, the other is solidly blue. But you've only got four electoral votes in Hawaii and 3 in Alaska. So they're not going to be that important necessarily. So I don't see any. The one state that might go is Florida, and that would be because there's a huge. There would have to be some kind of backlash against Senator Scott, who's up for re-election. He's in a somewhat close race. I was looking at the numbers in his case, and the Democrats kind of closing the gap a bit. And if somehow DeSantis messes up the recovery effort in Florida, there might be a backlash. But I don't necessarily see that as a
but if Mateus, if you're looking for drama sort of in other parts of the states, you just need to go look down the ticket. So look at the Senate races, for instance, which will be enormously consequential regardless of who wins the presidency. The Senate is very finely balanced. The electoral map, just because of the current cycle we're in, is really difficult for Democrats. They really can't afford to lose anything. So you can look to a state like Maryland, where a very popular former governor is running against a local Democratic official. Now, it seems like he doesn't, right now, based on the polls, she's pretty clearly ahead. But basically, look around, maybe look to Montana. So you've got in Montana, you've got John Tester, who is a very, very conservative type. He's a Democrat, but he's a sort of Montana Democrat, but he's in real trouble there. So, if the Dems lose him, and if the Republican were to win in Maryland and they lost control of the Senate and Trump won, that's a huge earth-shaking development down in other parts of the country.
Okay, let's take some more questions. I'm going to take Stuart Williams next. He just needs to open his microphone, and then we'll go to Hilary Matthews. So Stuart Williams, if you just open your microphone, which is, I think, on the bottom left-hand side, you can ask your question. But if you're not there, Stuart, we can't take your question. So, Hilary, are you there? Oh, Stuart, you are. Go on. Go ahead.
Right. Hello. I just, as a casual observer, not going into all the mechanics of the vote and who's likely to be voting in the marginals, the thing that I can't see is actually, what does Kamala Harris stand for? Who is she? I've got a pretty clear idea of what Donald Trump stands for. And I feel that is Harris tainted by association with the current administration? What has she been doing for the last 4 years?
So Stuart, so we all know, what do you think Trump stands for?
Well, it's not for me to say but it's the impression that you get. And as you're pointing out, people, their memory goes back to when Trump was president. And for a lot of people, life seemed better then. And also the other thing that I don't think does the Democrats any good at all is that you feel that the Democrats despise supporters of Trump. It's back to this basket of deplorables thing. And that's not the way to win over people. And I don't think that, it works in the other direction. But I don't think that the Trump supporters necessarily think that Harris is a bad person. In fact, they don't really know what she is.
Yeah, Tom, I think it's a fair point. What does she stand for?
Well, let me just say that there's this term now that's being used by political scientists and a few others called sectarian partisanship, where we aren't just divided by parties and some policies. Both sides actually hate each other to the point where the other side is evil, and I wouldn't want my children to have anything to do with them, let alone marry somebody from the other party. That kind of intensity makes it really difficult for one side to really accept the candidate of the other. In terms of Harris and what she stands for, she's definitely trying to portray herself as someone who is not like Trump. And if you want a definition of Trump, it's someone who is far driving, unafraid to break the rules, and make outrageous statements about everything under the sun. And yes, he can claim that he brought the economy to a better place. But as Obama pointed out in his speech the other day, Trump inherited Biden's economy. Oh, I'm sorry. Trump inherited Obama's economy, which was doing very well. And over the time that he was in office, Trump cut taxes for the wealthy and did a few other things that actually was contributing to inflation. Then the pandemic hit, and the economy went down the tubes, along with much of the rest of the world. So Harris wants to portray herself as someone who is positive, as Nicholas pointed out. She's a change agent. And there was a poll recently that did show her gaining on Trump in that area, that people look at her now as much more likely to bring about positive change. So,
yeah. Okay. Malcolm.
But Stuart taps. Yeah, Stuart taps into this is the knock on Harris, even among some Democrats. When she ran unsuccessfully for the nomination in 2019, she had much more liberal positions than she's espousing now when she's running as the formal candidate. So people say, she's a flip-flopper. She has tried to explain that progression, I guess. Her defenders will point out that she hasn't had very long to turn the ship around, in the sense that she got past the ball quite late in proceedings. So she's having to do this in a pretty condensed time frame. We are seeing her get out and about more. She just did Howard Stern's famous radio show. She's talked about her gun ownership. She revealed on, was it 60 Minutes, I think, that she's a Glock owner. So that's the kind of stuff and she did it quite in passing-ish. She wasn't really, it didn't come across so much as the pandering effect was diminished, maybe, I think her supporters would say. So she is reaching out. She's doing a lot of other podcasts. Charlemagne the God, who, if you're not familiar, is a very well listened to radio host who's very influential in the African American community. That's not his real name, obviously, but I can't remember what his real name is. But he's a big name and influential. So she's reaching out. She is doing outreach to try and explain who she is to people. Whether she's got there as, Stuart may be right that she is still indistinct to some.
I guess the issue here is that most people have made up their minds, and the number of people who have yet to decide is very, very small. So if we come back to Stuart's question, most people are not in doubt about who they want to support.
Could I just make two other points?
Yeah, go on.
There's a profile of her this week in the Financial Times, which it struck me that she's a pretty tough lady, but she's been laying low for the last 4 years. The other one, there's a friend of mine who, every time you mention Trump, the sort of red mist descends. But he was talking to his financial advisor, and he said, listen, if you're concerned about your portfolio, then you should hope Trump wins, because that's going to increase the value of your investment. So,
yeah,
anyone makes of that.
Yeah, not the first time I said. I'm going to bring in another question now, I think from Hilary Matthews. Hilary, you're there. Go ahead, Hilary. Just open your microphone. Go on.
Hi. Before I ask the question, I was thinking I have to go back to a couple of things that have already been mentioned. First, the inflation and the cost of living. It seems to me that Harris and her side cannot get across the fact that the increased prices is worldwide. It's not an American problem. It's the problem of the whole world, as several of you have said. And that doesn't seem to be getting across, that everybody's blaming the Biden administration for increase in prices when it's a worldwide thing as a result of the pandemic. So that's my first comment. And then I wondered if you could comment on the role of social media. Having watched Gabriel Gatehouse's The Coming Storm, or listened to it, sorry, I should say, and I know we're going to be talking to him in another session, Nick. It seems to me that this election may be decided by how much misinformation gets out there. I think in many ways social media is more important than whatever Harris or Trump can do in person in the next 3 weeks. And my last thing was, you haven't mentioned the Asian vote. Is that significant?
I'd love to add into that Elon Musk, but maybe we'll come on to Elon Musk in a second, because there's obviously the weight and money that he's throwing into it. But yeah, I mean, misinformation. Do we have stats on the impact of? Can we measure it in some way, Tom?
I haven't seen anything that actually measures it, but everyone I know and everything that I've been reading absolutely focuses on the importance, the significance of misinformation, even to the point right now of the efforts to help people after Helena and now Milton, that Trump himself is spreading misinformation, that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Administration, is actually diverting resources to Democratic areas and not Republican areas, that people are only getting $750 and that's it. You know, there's just incredible misinformation coming from within the United States, let alone from Iran, Russia, China. You know, the other countries are just pumping it in here, and Americans are gullible. They really are. And I will add.
Sorry.
Just one last thing. Your point about Americans not understanding that the rest of the world has experienced inflation, we're rather myopic. You know, that you don't get beyond the borders. It's just like we can learn nothing else about the rest of the world that will benefit the United States. I bemoan that, but I'm just one person. That's reality. Malcolm.
I also have no statistics, I'm afraid, Hilary, but I can say, just from my own observation of some of the local news sites that I look at, what's new this time around, clearly social media had a role last time around. What we're seeing this time around, which I guess is not surprising but dismaying, is the impact of AI. Image generation is having an impact. So, for instance, during Hurricane Helene, and the immediate aftermath, we saw this very affecting picture of a very, very disconsolate young girl looking bleak in the floodwaters, clutching her wet puppy, and it was a very powerful image. It was totally generated by AI. You're seeing a lot of that kind of stuff. Some of it is obviously generated by AI, but we're at the point now where it's getting harder and harder to distinguish. And we're even seeing some local officials say, I know this isn't real, but it's because it taps into the way I feel about this issue. You know, it becomes a motif, an icon, a demonstration of my anger, my outrage, and so on. So it's having a complex, but I'm imagining quite powerful impact.
Yeah, okay. Well, I want to take another follow-up question from Matthias Leiter, and then we've got Audrey Wolf. Let's get Audrey first, because Audrey hasn't managed to put a question. Audrey, who's in Washington, D.C. Go ahead, Audrey.
Hello, everybody. I am very concerned that nobody seems to remember all the indictments against Trump, all the bad things he's done. These tweets that times when he comes on television, the fact that he couldn't sign on for another debate. He was very bad in his first debate. That was, I guess he realizes that finally. But he has a terrible reputation among a lot of people. But you have only mentioned, well, there's still the fact that Trump is unfit. Well, that's just one sentence we've said here. But isn't all of this other thing come into play in some way? Don't you see that?
But I guess we're pushing back at that and saying none of this manages to affect the vote much. And so, Audrey, you're saying it should matter, and I'm saying why doesn't it? So, Tom.
Well, it's pretty clear, given, and she's quite right, Audrey, that despite all the indictments and the convictions and all that, he has baked in about 40% of the voters in this country. and no matter what he does or what he will do that might be breaking the law, he won't shake those people. And those Democrats who absolutely won't ever support him, not just because of the things that he's been convicted of, but for all the horrible things that he's done in terms of undermining American culture and politics and whatever. So whatever remains out there of the people who might be susceptible to changing their minds, the convictions and his legal troubles do not seem to be a factor in shaping their vote. They just, it's amazing, and you point this out, that people accept him for what he is. Going back to Mateus's point, he doesn't not quite sure what Harris is or stands for, but we all seem to have a pretty good idea what Trump stands for, and that includes his convictions and his very unusual or weird behavior, as Waltz noted. And it just he just keeps rolling along, and we all just kind of accept it. And it's unfortunate. Had it been the other way around, had it been Biden had done all that stuff, he would have been not only out of the race, but out of the White House by now. Yeah.
Okay. One more question for Mateus, and then I think we're going to wrap it up. So go ahead, Mateus.
So if Trump wins, it will be because of men. And if Harris wins, it will be because of women. Do you agree with this proposition? And do you think that a higher women turnout is possible? And to that, I will add, do you still think that this election is 50-50?
So let's go to Malcolm first of all. Women were seen as a crucial factor in 2020. The suburban vote, suburban women were seen as the key area that the Democrats had to secure in order to win. So Biden attributes a large part of his win to suburban women, I suppose, or that's what I was led to believe. Malcolm.
Yeah, this is what's being described as a highly gendered election, which is a terrible term, but it does support the point that Mateus is making, which is that Trump's support among men is significantly larger than Harris's, and it has grown. And the same can be said in reverse for her support among women. So it does, to some extent, depend, which one of the, and in an environment where very few people remain undecided, the turnout becomes really important. So it's not just what people think. We know the electorate's broadly 50-50, and we've seen in the swing states it's broadly 50-50. We saw that with Tom at the start. So it does become a question of persuading the small number of people who are persuadable and then getting your folks to the polls. And that's really the test for the next 3+ weeks.
Tom, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, we know that women now turn out in greater numbers than men, not by a dramatic amount, but they are more likely to vote than men. And that suburban women in particular seem to be motivated about women's health. I won't say abortion, but it's about women's health and controlling their bodies. And they are motivated. And that would be something that would affect women who had been Republican voters in the suburbs are more likely now, I think, to vote for Harris, because of the health issue, the women's health issue.
Yeah.
I have a small anecdotal add on that. I was in a bar in Milwaukee recently, got chatting to two guys who, in any other circumstances, would have been down the line Trump voters. They were very proud and very passionate gun owners, or the full stereotype. But when it came to the subject of abortion, they were vitriolically pro. And it was a problem for them with Trump, to the point where they wouldn't vote for him. So that was really interesting to me.
Yeah, very unusual. Who knows? I'm actually betting on Trump winning, because I just that's a sort of gut feeling. I've got no real substance to put behind that, but my concerns are certainly about the black vote, the Hispanic vote, and what we saw in Michigan among white working class voters who are clearly not backing Harris. So that's my concern, but who knows? I think we're going to be on tenterhooks. We're going to be back in the National Women's Democratic Club in Washington, D.C. on election night, where we were in 2016, which caused a huge shock in that room. So I'm looking forward to being there again and hoping the result's going to be somewhat different. Those are my colours I'm putting out there. Thank you very much to Malcolm Brown for his time. Thank you also to Professor Thomas Baldino. They are both going to be in Pennsylvania along with Alex Norris. And I'm going to be in Michigan, as is Owen Bennett-Jones, and we've got Professor David Dulio with Owen Bennett-Jones, and then a veteran correspondent, John Lindstrom, who covered Lansing, the state capital, for more than 30 years. No, I think almost 50 years, in fact. So we've got a great team and some fascinating itineraries. And then when we're in DC, we're being helped by a very senior former ABC executive, Stacia Deshishku. And we've got access to CNN, Fox, amazing access when we're in Washington, D.C. And I'm sad to say that due to a couple of late cancellations, we still have availability on both tours. So that's it for now. Our next talk coming up is going to be with the author of this book, and as Hilary hinted, it's with Gabriel Gatehouse. He's a former BBC correspondent. He still does stuff for the BBC, and this has been an enormous success, and it's about how conspiracy theories have taken over political life, or much of life, in the United States. Great book, a very good podcast series as well. And he's going to be, he may be on with us next week. We're just waiting to confirm the time. So my thanks again to Malcolm Brown and Tom Baldino. Fantastic talk there. Just a quick look at what's coming up for next year. A great range of tours. Our first major tour next year is in Mexico. We've got the Financial Times correspondent there leading that tour. And then we're in Italy to look at populism, the rise of the right, and that's with Tobias Jones, who writes regularly for The Guardian. He's a really great speaker. We really enjoyed our time with him on previous. He's done 2 tours previously with us. And then we're off to Moldova and Transnistria. Transnistria, I'm sure you know, is the Russian dominated and controlled little statelet within Moldova. Very safe to travel to, and a sort of fascinating study of how Russians really should be treated within Europe. It's a sort of big question about Russian influence there. Uganda with Michaela Wrong, the former Economist correspondent and author of some really good books on that region. That's in June. We're scheduled to go to Ireland. That coincides with the beginning of the marching season in Northern Ireland. Fascinating time to be going. Impact of Brexit there on the question of a united Ireland. We are due to go back to Cyprus and look at the Turkish-dominated north of the island, and questions about the possibility of reunification. Taiwan, that's a tour which is very, very, very popular. Lots of you are very interested in that. We are waiting for dates for that, possibly in late October. And then back to South Africa with our wonderful correspondent there, Mr. Sullivan. A lot to get stuck into. The dates are out for most of those tours, as you can see there, and we'll have most of those tours up on the website very shortly.